the topic that was chosen for today is how to reinvent your soul. And even though I signed off on it and approved it, I don't agree with it. It's just for the record. You can't reinvent your soul. The exercise has to be to rediscover, to reconnect, to re-engage. Any of those words would do. But to say that you're going to reinvent your soul, I don't know. I think that might... So Annie, when you introduced it now, you said to reinvent yourself. I'm saying that's what you said when you introduced it. So that, I think, is probably a better way to describe this. So I had a little bit of an epiphany on Shabbos. I'm sure it happens to you also on a regular basis on Shabbos. You always have an epiphany. Usually it's something along the lines of, I shouldn't have undertaken so many things for the meal. Could have been simpler. We didn't have to drive ourselves crazy. It still would have worked. But the epiphany that I had on Shabbos is they attribute this to Einstein. Now, I don't know if it's true or not, because recently I saw a meme that was doing the rounds that said, not everything that is published on the internet is true, Albert Einstein. So, I don't know if this one is necessarily true, but they say that Einstein is the one who said that if you do the same thing repeatedly and expect different results, that is insanity. That is insanity. So here we are, and we're going to say it's Elul again. We've been doing this for a few years. We've done a few Rosh Hashanahs over our lives, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and here we are again, and you can kind of pull out your notes from last year, or you can pull out your tablecloth from last year, whatever it is that you do in order to prepare for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And we do the same things again and again. We blow the shofar, we give extra tzedakah, and we expect that somehow magically the next year is going to be fundamentally different. So repeating the same thing again and again and expecting different results is insanity. Would you agree with that? Yeah. So what should we do? What should we do differently? You know, I always like to kind of test the crowd. When I say the crowd, not necessarily the people sitting in the room, the broader Jewish crowd. Where would you find the broadest Jewish crowd to test an idea with? Shul and Yom Kippur. If that's the breadth of your Jewish crowd, Shul and Yom Kippur. I don't know about you. I have to daven on Yom Kippur. I don't get much opportunity to chat with the crowd on Yom Kippur. That's when you find the most people. So I've got another place where you can find even more people. What's that, Joburg? They don't allow me on Joburg Jewish Mondays. So but you're getting warmer. Social media. If you want the broadest range of responses, you post on social media. So I posted on social media just over a week ago on various platforms. What crosses your mind? The first thought that crosses your mind when you realize that it is going to be Elul next week. So this was already a whole week ago. So what crosses your mind? The first thing that crosses your mind when you realize it's going to be Elul next week. And there were all sorts of interesting, you always get those people who try to be funny, the tongue-in-cheek responses, the very philosophical, the introspective, you get all kinds of responses. So somebody said this: the rabbis are going to beat to death the line, Ani ledoidi v'doidi li. That's the first thing that crosses their mind. Here we go again. They're going to start with that line again. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. That is what Elul stands for. There's only one place, I believe, where that line is overused more than in the month of Elul, and that is at Sheva Brochos. Because you'll always get somebody gets up at Sheva Brochos and says, I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me, and that's what relationships are all about, and it's reciprocity, and all these wonderful things. So, do me a favor, raise your hand if you also feel that, oh gosh, every year we've got to hear the same line. Do the rabbis not have anything else that they could use at this time of the year? Ani ledoidi, v'doidi, ani ledoidi. You walk into certain places, they're playing that music. It's like the Ani ledoidi song. I'm sure if you get, do people still send Rosh Hashanah cards? Not so much, huh? Now it's the virtual card, the e-card. A donation has been given in your honor too. I gave 18 Rand on behalf of all my friends. Okay, but what happens in the cards? It's a little bit overworked. Don't you think? It's a little bit overworked. You're going to say something?
No.
Oh, so a little bit overworked. Ani ledoidi, I am to my beloved. Okay, fine. So we're going to do the same thing again and again every single year, expecting different results. It's a little bit mashuga, so let's do the same thing differently to try and find different results. So how do you understand the message of that line and what it has to do with Elul? Great way to silence the crowd. What is it? What do you think it means? What does it represent?
Marriage.
Marriage. So marriage between?
You and Hashem.
Between us and Hashem. Right? Between us and Hashem. Now, let's just talk about that for one moment, because I do think that if you're going to describe our relationship with Hashem like the relationship of a marriage, then right now is one of those times we're not speaking to each other. Because frankly, I don't know about you, but I'm not very impressed with what Hashem has done to our people since October 7th. So if this is a marriage relationship, right now it feels like he needs to buy us flowers.
Repeatedly.
Right? Exactly. It's like the person, ever hear the story of the man who walks into a florist and he says, I need a bunch of flowers? And the florist says to him, are they happy birthday flowers or I'm sorry flowers? Which kind of flowers do you need? So let's be honest, let's be frank. At this particular junction in Jewish history, particularly this week, after the horrific events of the beginning of this week, I don't really necessarily feel so much like I'm in this loving marriage relationship with Hashem. I feel like I'm in a bit of an abusive relationship, maybe. So it sounds nice. Ani ledoidi will sing the songs. The kids will come home, they'll have their little king in the field things, but it doesn't feel very comfortable right now. And I'm always reminded of the story of the man who goes over to the chazan at the end of Yom Kippur. And he says to the chazan, how did it go? Obviously implying, was your voice okay? Do you feel like your prayers got through? And the chazan says to him, ask me before Rosh Hashanah next year, I'll be able to tell you how Yom Kippur was this year. And that's quite a profound and frightening thought. Because if you could turn the tape back to exactly 1 year ago now, how were we feeling? I don't remember. But it was definitely different to how we're feeling. Very different. Imagine if we would have had insight. Imagine if we would have had a sense of what was coming. Just imagine, it would have completely overwhelmed us. But just imagine if we had a sense that there was this dark cloud hanging over the Jewish nation. Last year, when we walked into Shul for Kol Nidre, how would it have been? How would we have engaged? How would we have reacted? How would we have prayed? Think about it. If we had even an inkling of what was coming. Anyway, so can you imagine if we had an insight, if we had an inkling a year ago as to what was coming, would we also just be singing songs, Ani Ledoidi, sending gift cards? Just imagine, what would we have done differently? What would we have done differently? Prayed harder, right? We would have prayed harder. We would have been very present on Yom Kippur. Now I have to share something that's quite personal, because even still now, and those of you who come to regular shiurim of mine have heard this, but still now it gives me goosebumps. Last year for Yom Kippur, I did a lot of research on the Yom Kippur War, because it was going to be the 50th anniversary. And I chose to speak at Kol Nidre and at Yizkor and at Ne'ilah, all on the theme of the Yom Kippur War. And when October 7th happened, it was so shocking, because this was the stuff I'd just been researching. These were stories that I just told in Shul, about people being pulled out of Shul and called up to go fight. And literally, that was deja vuing. It was happening 50 years later, not on Yom Kippur, but on Shmini Atzeres, which spiritually and mystically has a very strong link to Yom Kippur. It was profound and frightening and overwhelming all at the same time. So this year, in the preparation for the month of Elul, without even realizing what I was doing, without even thinking specifically in the context of 50 years, I pulled out a talk that the Rebbe gave at the beginning of the month of Elul. In fact, the Shabbos Mevorchim, Shabbos that blesses the month of Elul, which is this Shabbos we've just had, 50 years ago. And I just pulled it out because, I like generally to study things in the decades when they happen, if you know what I mean. So in other words, I'd like to find something that the Rebbe said 50 years ago this date, 60 years ago this date. So I just pulled it out without thinking in the context of the Yom Kippur War. Now let's put that into context, because 50 years ago now, the Jewish world was experiencing something almost identical to what we're experiencing now. They were finishing the period of Kaddish for those who had been killed in the initial attacks on Yom Kippur, as we've just been finishing the period of Kaddish for those who were killed on October 7th. They were reflecting back on what they had experienced because they were coming up to the anniversary. And we know how it is. When you come up to the anniversary of an event, you come up to the yahrzeit of someone, it evokes all kinds of emotions. They were going through that experience. And I didn't think about that when I took out this book and opened it up and started to read what the Rebbe was saying 50 years ago in the most similar experience of the Jewish world that we could find. And what he says is very profound. Why do we always talk about ani ledoidi v'doi at this time of the year? Does anybody know why? How did that line get into Elul? See, the rabbis haven't beaten it to death. We still haven't explained this well enough. How do we get from Elul to ani ledoidi?
Because it's got the first letter.
Correct, because the word Elul is an acronym for those words which are from King Solomon in Shir Ashir in the Song of Songs. That's how we get to these words. Elul is an Aleph and a Lamed and a Vav and a Lamed. The Aleph stands for Ani, and the Lamed stands for Le Dodi, and the Vav stands for Vedodi, and the Lamed stands for Li. I am to my beloved, which is Hashem, and Hashem is to me. You know what's funny about things that we repeat regularly? We never stop to question them. If you want to find the most profound insights in Judaism, go back to the stuff that you're the most used to, pretend you know nothing about them, question everything, and then you'll actually get a whole different perspective. So like, for example, when it comes to the Pesach Seder, we do the Pesach Seder and the Pesach Seder and the Pesach Seder and the Pesach Seder, and we're all so used to it, we know exactly what's going to happen, and we miss the profundity of the Pesach Seder because we're so used to it and because we have our rinse, repeat, and that's just what happens. Nobody ever pauses to ask. I never thought of asking this question. I'm sure hundreds and maybe thousands of people have never thought of asking this question. And the Rebbe asks this question. The Lamed of Le Dodi, Le means two. It doesn't have to be Le Dodi. The sentence would have worked just as well if it had said Ani, I, La Hashem, which is more direct. I am dedicated to Hashem, V'Hashem li, and Hashem reciprocates to me. It would have been the same message, more direct, without all the poetry of trying to interpret who the beloved is. Just say it straight. Don't you wish sometimes people would just say things straight and leave all the poetry out of it? They dance around a subject and they make it sound so flowery. Just say it. I am to Hashem. This is the time of the year that I've got to really focus and I've got to invest and I've got to dedicate myself to Hashem, and then the expectation and the hope is that Hashem will reciprocate. Why does it say Le Dodi? I am to my beloved. V'dodi li, and my beloved is to me. Why? So there's an easy answer, right? What's the easy answer? Because that's the verse. We're taking the month of Elul, which is a name that was attributed to the month much later in history, only when the Jews were returning from the Babylonian exile to rebuild the second temple. That's long after, that's hundreds of years after King Solomon. So they used his words to associate with the name Elul. But that doesn't really answer the question, because the question is, why do you need his words? You could just make a phrase. Or why did he use that expression? Why is King Solomon speaking in poetry, why doesn't he just say simply, Ani la Hashem, I have a relationship with Hashem and Hashem has a relationship with me? Why le dodi? 50 years ago, on the upcoming anniversary, like just weeks before the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. And he says, you know why? Because sometimes we forget that Hashem sees us as beloved. Sometimes we think that he's turned his back, or he's upset at us, or he's frustrated with us, or he's given up on us. Because year after year, we just keep doing the same things again and again without changing anything, and we're not really growing or developing. This is the time of the year we're supposed to be honest and introspective and look in the mirror and see who we really are. And the reality is that until a person is willing to acknowledge where they are failing, that it's incredibly unlikely that they'll move, that they'll grow, that they'll change. So we have to have the bitterness of recognizing where we're at. You know, in today's Torah portion, if you take the parasha of the week and you split it up into the 7 portions and assign one of those portions to the day of the week. So today is the 4th portion of the upcoming parasha, which I'm sure everybody here has already read and researched. So you'll know then that the parasha is Shoftim, which is all about judges and policemen, which, by the way, and I don't want to go down a whole sidebar over here, but it is extremely relevant because this is the parasha that discusses how you keep justice and how you keep law and order, and that it's not necessarily the correct thing to be all nice and kind and panda when there are people who have to be dealt with harshly. In today's portion, the very last verse of today's portion, and just for context, this is the part where the Torah warns us that we're not supposed to get involved with trying to predict the future and going to fortune tellers and all that kind of thing. And then there is a line that says this, Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. Anybody know what the word tamim means? What's that? Mayim. It's associated, right? You see the association with the word mayim. What else?
Always.
Always is tamid. Right? What's tamim? Okay, let's break it down. So the key of the root of that word is tam. Where do you know the word tam from?
Taste.
That's ta'am. Right? Which, by the way, it's actually spelled differently. It sounds very much the same. So what is the word tam? Where do we have the word tam? Believe it or not, I actually gave you a clue already a few minutes ago. Can I make everybody feel like, oh my gosh, what did we miss? The clue was the Pesach Seder. Because in the Pesach Seder we have 4 sons. One of the sons is called the Tam. What's the Tam? We all know the 4 sons. Let's do this by a process of elimination. So it's not the wise son, it's not the wicked son, so it's the simple son. So that's the word tam. The word tam means simple. Now, simplicity could be an advantage or a disadvantage. It depends on the circumstances. Sometimes simplicity is not favorable. You know, so you look at somebody and say, oh, they're very simple, they don't understand, they don't know what's going on. Sometimes it's a negative. But sometimes simplicity is incredibly positive. So, for example, when you're trying to communicate, simplicity is positive. Can you imagine if somebody came to give us a shir about Elul? Just imagine. Hypothetically. And the person who came to give the shir about Elul was very flowery and very fancy and highfalutin and used all mystical terminology, and we have no clue what they're talking about. Nothing. And we walk out of there and say, wow, that was profound. Because that's a much safer bet than saying, I have no clue what just happened. So we say, wow, that was profound. You may walk out of the experience thinking, I've just met greatness, and that was a profound experience, but it was meaningless. Whereas if somebody can convey a simple message, meaningful, but simple, then you can walk out feeling empowered. That was worthwhile. I actually got something out of that. It was worth going. I didn't just waste an hour of my life that I can never get back. It was worthwhile. So tam, simple, is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's very meaningful to be simple. If you can distill something into simplicity, you've achieved a great thing. So you know the differences between being honest and being dishonest. Careful if you shake your head no. You should know the difference. But one of the differences is that when you're being dishonest, it's not simple. It's got to be elaborate. You've got to think about what did I say to so-and-so. Make sure I tell the same story to the next person. Make sure I don't forget any of the details. It becomes very elaborate. We tell the truth, it's simple. Simple. This is what happened. At this time of the year, we want to be simple. Simple, straightforward. This is me. This is what happened. This is what I felt over the last year. These are the times that I was angry at Hashem. These are the times that I felt let down. This is how I responded to that. Simple, honest. Tell it like it is. Now, we're afraid of doing that. We're afraid that if we're going to stand up in front of God and we're going to honestly, simply tell him what we did wrong, maybe we're jeopardizing ourselves. Maybe we're putting ourselves into a vulnerable position because now he has ammo against us. We're going into the period of judgment. I don't know how everybody else over here feels, but there are certainly people who get very nervous at this time of the year. Oy vey, we're going to Rosh Hashanah and Hashem's going to judge us and it's the day of judgment. And even some of the in the old days when we used to give out Rosh Hashanah cards, they have like the scales. That is such subliminal abuse. Like, yeah, have a good yontiv. I hope your scales are okay. Have a wonderful yontiv. Your life's in the balance. Think about it. So we get quite overwhelmed. We don't want to give more ammunition to God and start owning up to the things that we've done wrong. Well, let's be honest. There's no escape. There's no hiding. He's got records of everything. Long before they had CCTV and voice recognition on your phone that's tracking everything that you're doing, collating all your information. God already had that tech. He knows all this stuff. We're not going to land up in more trouble because we own up to what's happened. It's the simpler way. Take it. Own it. This is me. This is what I've dealt with. This is where I've been. This is where my head has been. These are my disappointments. These are, right? So when you consult and confront all of that, when you recognize that we've all got hang-ups, and we've all had times that Hashem let us down, and we all have times that we let him down. We have times we let ourselves down. We have times we let our families down. Tamim tiyeh, if you're simple and honest with that, then the verse continues, Im Hashem Elokecha, then you can be with Hashem. Then you can be close to God. God doesn't operate in an environment where we're ducking and diving and trying to find elaborate excuses or explanations. Simple. So Ani L'Doidi, why are we being so fancy and keep it simple? Ani La Hashem, I am to Hashem, V'Hashem li, and Hashem will reciprocate. Because ultimately, surely that's the message of this time of the year. If we do what we're supposed to, we can expect something in return. That's why we're given this 4-week head start before Rosh Hashanah. Could you imagine if they just dropped us down in Rosh Hashanah and said, okay, now do everything you can to make sure you have a great year next year. So that's why we get this run-up. We get this 40-day period that starts today and ends on Yom Kippur to help us, to prime us, to get us ready. Just say it simply. Ani la Hashem v'Hashem li. I am to Hashem and Hashem is to me. So that's why it says Ani l'Doidi. First thing we have to realize is that we're beloved to Hashem. It doesn't necessarily always feel that way. From our perspective, being on the receiving end, especially in a collective dark period like we have been through and are going through, it's quite difficult to recognize that we're still beloved in Hashem's eyes. And that's where we reframe ourselves. Everybody always tells us year after year, and we keep repeating the same thing, feel bad. Because if you feel bad, then you're good. Which, by the way, is part of the typical Jewish psychology. Jewish people generally feel better when we feel bad about something. If we feel good about everything, then we start to feel bad about the fact that surely there's something we should be feeling bad about. And that's what they've told us for all these years. Feel bad. Back in the old days in the shtetl, you used to have what was called the Maggid, the itinerant preacher, who used to go from place to place and used to get up and tell everybody in shul, you're all going to hell. Can you imagine? Imagine how the shuls would be nowadays if rabbis did this. You're all going to hell. Can you imagine? Nobody would go to shul, would you? Would you go to shul if every Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that's what you were told? You're all going to, I wouldn't go to shul. Even if I was one saying it. But the reality is, somewhere in our collective conscience, there's the sense that you have to feel bad. You have to feel inadequate. You have to feel that perhaps you've done something that's angered Hashem. And we don't even stop to think about it. It's so embedded in our subconscious that we just kind of take that for granted. And I'll prove it to you. You know how often, including probably people sitting in this room, so I do not have you in mind, just in case you ever had this conversation. You know how often people come over and they say, I'm going through a difficult patch. This happened, that happened. It could be, God forbid, health issues. It could be financial issues. It could be family strife. Is God punishing me? That's what you always ask us, the rabbis. Is God punishing me? So what do you think we're supposed to do? Go download a case file. Like, how are we supposed to know these things? But it just shows you that that's where our mind is. Our mind is, we believe that if something's happening that is difficult, that is uncomfortable, that is challenging, then that means that Hashem is punishing us. And then somewhere, subconsciously, we believe, well, obviously we deserve this. Ani ledoidi, the first reframe to get us right for Rosh Hashanah, for a new year, for different energy, for a shift, for blessing, is to start recognizing this is a loving relationship from Hashem to us, and should be from us to Him. Imagine saying this in a public forum 50 years ago, coming up for the yortzites of all the people who had died in the Yom Kippur War. Imagine that shift. Imagine how that challenged the sensibilities of the community. And then in that talk, the Rebbe goes on to say that this links to a principle called bitachon. If we want to shift ourselves or reinvent ourselves at this time of the year, these two themes have to come into focus. A beloved relationship and the principle of bitachon, which is absolute trust. That's different to faith. You know the differences between faith and trust? Very simple. Very simple. I don't know if you, as a kid, had older siblings who experimented with you. But I will acknowledge that we did with our younger brother. So what we used to do is and we did this sometimes at like bar mitzvahs and weddings, if you can imagine. So we used to do, that trust fall. So one older brother would sit in front, one older brother would sit behind, and the younger brother would stand there stiff, ramrod straight, and then he'd fall back, and the one brother would catch him and throw him forward, and then the other one would catch him and he'd pendulum back and forth between us. It was great entertainment, by the way, for weddings. We never charged, which was a problem. We should have. That's trust. Trust is when you fall, knowing that someone's going to catch you. Faith is when you tell somebody that you believe that they'll catch you. We all have faith. It's embedded in us. If we didn't have faith, we wouldn't have all these problems around feeling bad and around what if I don't do what Hashem wants. That's because we have faith. Trust is that we're confident someone's going to catch us, even when we're falling, even when we feel that we've already fallen. Trust is that somebody's going to pick us up if we've fallen. Trust is that there's someone who can turn things around even when they feel like they're too far gone. If I know that I'm in a loving relationship, if I know that the individual on the other end has this incredible care and love, then I trust that things will turn out well, even when right now they're devastating. That's not easy. That's not easy to get our heads around. That's not easy to understand. That's not something we could ever dare to say to somebody who's going through trauma or going through loss or going through grief. That's something each individual has to find on their own. But that's how we reframe. Now, what does that mean in real terms? What does that actually mean?
So faith, just
So faith,
what's the difference?
so the difference is,
Telling someone
faith
they know
is,
they're there.
faith is, I know that you can catch me. Trust is allowing myself to
it's
fall.
Literally, faith is like me putting a candle and saying to everyone, know that there are people around that support you.
Correct. But I think the thing is that faith is often theoretical, whereas trust is practical. So we all speak a language of faith to ourselves, to our families, certainly to our children. But it's a whole different thing to live with trust. So let's use an example. When we walk into Shul on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur, by the way, can I just do a quick test? Which one is the more scary day? Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur? Yeah? Yom Kippur? Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah? Okay, it's interesting. It's really interesting because Yom Kippur is actually considered to be a joyous day, and Rosh Hashanah is the day that is considered to be a very overwhelming day. So it's interesting. So you walk into Rosh Hashanah, right? Do you have faith that whatever the troubles of this year have been, that Hashem could change them in the coming year? Absolutely, we all do. If we didn't have that faith, we wouldn't bother. We wouldn't arrive on Rosh Hashanah. We wouldn't participate. We wouldn't make sure to hear the shofar. Or Yom Kippur for that matter, right? Because different people resonate with different things. I mean, the amount of individuals who fast on Yom Kippur is phenomenal. It really is. Especially when you consider the levels of attachment to the Judaism of people who fasted. Why? Because we have faith. We have faith that it could be okay. So the chap is not just to walk into Rosh Hashanah and into Yom Kippur believing things could be better in the next year. It's to walk in with the trust that the next year will be better. Now let's try and understand what that actually means and how we shift there. So I want to do a little step out of the conversation for a moment and a little assessment of what's happened in the last year as Jewish people. You know, there's a Gemara that tells us that in order for Mashiach to come, the whole Jewish nation has to keep one Shabbos. You've heard that, right? And we know that that's very much part and parcel of the whole Shabbos project and that concept. I want to suggest, and some of you in the room, we've had this conversation before, that since October 7th, the whole Jewish world has kept the whole of Judaism together. I'll explain to you what I mean by that. If you go back, let's try this chronologically. If you go back to last year, Hanukkah, everybody shared Hanukkah together. That doesn't mean that we all were at the same event, but every single one of us experienced things related to Hanukkah that we all experienced. So let's say it was putting up a menorah in Gaza on top of a tank, or whether it was a prayer service for families of the hostages. We don't even remember all of the things that happened, but because of technology, we all shared the experience of Hanukkah in some way together. We all shared the experience of Purim together, of Pesach together. We all shared weddings together because we saw soldiers getting married on their bases. We shared brises together where the father was on Zoom while he was at the front lines and the bris was happening. We shared a pidyon haben together, which most of us have never experienced in our lives, where a guy in the middle of nowhere finds another soldier who's a Kohen and he does the pidyon haben for his son. We experienced, unfortunately, many funerals together, including, of course, this week. We experienced dates in the Jewish calendar that normally we would have glossed over, like Tisha B'Av, where you had the Tisha B'Av gathering in Hostage Square that went viral. We shared an experience of love. We shared an experience this year, which I believe is unprecedented, of the whole Jewish world being one great doidi. Because you know what it means to be beloved. means we feel each other's emotions. So when other members of the Jewish world were in pain, we felt their pain. This week is unfortunately a very powerful example of that. And it made me think this week that when the Jewish people were at the foot of Mount Sinai and they were about to receive the Torah describes that they stood there ke'ish echad, like one person, belev echad, with one heart. And since October 7th, it has been a visceral experience of one heart. Our collective joy, our collective anxiety, our collective grief, our collective anger. I don't believe there is a time in history since the Jews stood at the foot of Sinai where the whole Jewish nation is sharing the same emotion, where the whole Jewish nation is sharing the same experiences, the life cycle experiences, the calendar experiences. It's the most bizarre and inspiring thing. This has been a year of doidi, that we are all beloved and cherished to each other. We don't know each other. We sent messages, we sent money, we sent gifts, we sent clothing to people we will never meet. We grieved alongside with people we've only seen on a screen. They have no idea that we exist. We've hosted people in our homes who were either hostages or soldiers who've told their stories as they were our stories. Ani le doidi. That's what this month is all about. We want to reinvent ourselves. We want to recreate ourselves. Let's stop for a moment and be tamim. Let's be honest. Let's be simple. Let's state the facts as they are. We have reinvented ourselves in this last year in an unprecedented fashion. We have achieved something as a Jewish world that nobody ever believed would be possible, which is, and people always bring this up, which is how just before October 7th, there was such division in Israel. And now, they are still having those same fights without the division. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. You would have seen it now with the strike that they called this week. And how the workers did not want to participate in the strike because they felt that it wasn't right. Because they felt the doidi, the care and the empathy for fellow Jews. The lines of conflict are still there. The emotions of conflict are no longer what they were. For Israeli society to be able to argue and fight for the hostage deal, against the hostage deal, for the judicial reform, against the judicial reform, and yet simultaneously feel absolutely one, nobody believed that that was possible. Nobody believed that could happen. Everybody believed the only way we'd resolve this is everybody had to get over their issues and then they could be on the same page. And we've now learned that you could still have your issues and be on the same page. It's the unique complexity of the human condition. That when you have a deep enough connection, when you realize that this is doidi, that this is who we are, that this is who we love, that this is our deepest relationship, then you realize we could fight and we're still together. We could disagree in the most extreme forms, and at the same time, we have the deepest emotional connection. We cry with each other. We celebrate with each other. We're anxious for each other. It's one big collective doidi. We want to reinvent ourselves. It's got nothing to do, please don't quote me. It's got nothing to do with how from we are this year. It has everything to do with how there for each other we are. That is the energy of the now. That is the energy of this particular 5784 going into 5785. It is the energy of doidi, of how much we love, care, and are empathetic for each other, even though we have our differences, even though we're disappointed sometimes in each other. Ani le doidi, when I have that connection with my fellow Jew as my absolute soulmate, then v'doidili. Then Hashem responds with the same kind of love towards us. The Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, used to say that there are two very important cardinal mitzvahs in Judaism. One is to love God, and the other is to love your fellow Jew. Which one takes precedence? If you have to choose, which one takes precedence? And the answer is the love of your fellow Jew. You know why? I'll explain it to you very simply, in language that any mother can understand. If you come home one day, let's just say it's Mother's Day. Okay, I know this is treading on very sensitive ground over here, but let's say you come home on Mother's Day and your kids have made an elaborate celebration for you. There are flowers, they've made you lunch, they've made a beautiful sign that says Happy Mother's Day. You walk in, what do you feel like? You feel like $1,000,000, right? 2 minutes later, they are ripping each other to shreds. Now what do you feel like? You feel like, I don't care how much your sign says Happy Mother's Day. If you two could just get along for this afternoon, that would be the greatest Mother's Day gift you could ever give me. How do you show that you love Hashem? When you love His children. Because if you don't love His children, it's just lip service. You could be the frummest person with the biggest hat and the most expensive shaitel, and it makes no difference. It's a beautiful, elaborate Mother's Day sign. But until you love His children, ani ledoidi, you're not out of the starting blocks. So every single year when it comes this time, and we approach Rosh Hashanah, we start talking about what should we do. How do we gear ourselves up? How do we shift? How do we create new energy? How do we achieve something that's going to fundamentally change the nature of this Rosh Hashanah and this Yom Kippur, and by extension next year? So it depends who you hang out with. Some people are going to give you a 40-day plan. Some people give you a 60-day plan. Some people give you the extra ultra platinum version of the 40-day plan. Some people will give you the Tehillim that you're supposed to say, how much tzedakah you're supposed to give, learn this particular thing, watch that podcast. I want to suggest, imagine from now until Yom Kippur, because today, the first day of Elul, is when Moshe went up onto Mount Sinai, and Yom Kippur is the day he came down. The reason he went up on Mount Sinai on this day, Rosh Chodesh Elul, was to ask Hashem to forgive the Jews for the golden calf. And when he came down from the mountain on the other end of this, 40 days later, it was to tell the Jews that not only had Hashem forgiven them, but that He had introduced a new concept in Judaism called Yom Kippur. A day that every single year you could fix the worst things that you had done. Was Moshe a frum man?
Well, it must be.
Must have been, right? I think it was fairly, I'd be comfortable to eat in his house. Right? He's a frum man. I'd go so far as to say he might have been the frummest man who ever lived.
Well, we didn't have the law.
Right? I'm saying he was up there. He got the Torah before it was public knowledge. He had insider trading. I mean, he knew what was going on. He was on side. He knew everything. He was undoubtedly the frummest man who ever lived. What's the worst thing you could ever do as a Jew? Nobody knows. Serve an idol. Serving idols is the worst thing a Jewish person could ever do. Especially if you serve an idol at the foot of Mount Sinai, which is the place where God just told you, do not make idols. As the frummest man in the world, how do you think he should have reacted? How do you expect he should have reacted? Tell them all they're going to hell. Like any good rabbi. That's it. You did the worst thing at the worst time, in the worst place. You're all going to hell. What does he do? Climbs up on the mountain to argue with Hashem to forgive the Jews. Why? Because if you want to show Hashem that you love Him, show Him that you love His children. Don't get caught up in whether his children live up to your ideals or your standards or your philosophy or your version. Love his children. Imagine if we went from now until Yom Kippur, finding a way every day to do one thing for one Jewish person who's not in our close circle. One little bit of care and concern. It could be a WhatsApp message. It could be a hello at school to the person you don't normally have anything to do with in the parking lot. It could be sending somebody challah for Shabbos. I don't know. You're a creative group of people. I'm sure you can come up with many ideas. Imagine if every day from now until Yom Kippur, at a time in history where it feels like the entire world is against the Jewish people, if we every day did something for somebody in the Jewish people. I promise you there's no better way to reinvent ourselves for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And then we can truly say, Ani ledoidi v'doidili. I'm confident that Hashem sees me as beloved because I've chosen to make his people, his children, beloved. And then we can have the bitachon, we can have the trust that, please God, not only will the coming year be a good year, but as only Hashem can do, the kind of year that is the goodness that makes whatever darkness we went through in the last year dissipate and compensate for it. And please God, replace what we had lost. I don't know how to do that. That's Hashem's business. But please God, that should be the kind of year that we have.
Amen.